I screamed as my daughter swallowed a handful of trail mix. Wait! Your allergies! My hands shook as I rummaged through one of the drawers and pulled out an EpiPen. But when I glanced back, my daughter Allie sat there perfectly fine, just staring back at me confused. What's wrong, Daddy? My wife Carol walked in from the living room, casual as could be. Don't worry, honey. Kids grow out of allergies all the time. The camp nurse explained that it happens. But tree nut allergies were lifelong, and Allie had been deathly allergic since she was born. But that only added to the other weird things I had found. When Allie had returned from camp, she looked eerily different. Sure, she had the same golden hair and blue eyes, but the mole on her hand completely disappeared, along with the small scar she had gotten on the playground last year. And Allie was taller, much taller, almost too tall for an 8-year-old. I asked my wife about it, but she just waved her hand dismissively. Kids grow and change. Maybe you just remembered things wrong? But when I tried looking for pictures at home to compare, I noticed it was all gone. Every single family photo had also mysteriously been removed from all the walls, the mantel, even the fridge. Only our wedding photos remained. Not a trace of Allie. Have you seen all our pictures? I asked my wife that night before heading to bed. She yawned. Oh, I was just redecorating. Just getting ready for the fall season. Maybe we can go out and take new family photos together tomorrow, she suggested. But the next morning, when I was looking for my old toolbox, I spotted the box of photos deep in the attic storage. And in every single one of them, Allie's face had been carefully cut out with scissors. That's when I tested her. I handed her a stuffed bear and asked if she liked the new ribbon for Mr. Spots. She glanced over at me with a sweet smile and pulled the bear to her chest, rubbing her cheek against its soft fur. I love it so much, Daddy. Thank you. I felt all the blood in my body drain. Mr. Spots wasn't a bear. Mr. Spots was her stuffed Dalmatian, one she had slept with every night for 5 years. This wasn't my Allie. I tried to hide my shaking hands in my pocket and smiled back at the imposter. Anything for you, sweetie. When Carol and Allie left the house to go shopping, I called her summer camp. Hello, this is Allie's father. I just wanted to thank you for taking such good care of her last week. There was a long pause. Sir? Allie never arrived at camp. We called your wife Carol multiple times looking for her, but she informed us there was a family emergency. Is everything all right, sir? I hung up feeling sick. If Allie never went to camp, where had she been? I pulled up our phone records. The camp had called 6 times that first day. Carol declined them all. But she'd made 41 calls that week to someone named Bruce. My hands shook as I searched his name on social media. There it was. A photo from 3 years ago at the park near our house. A woman holding a baby beside him, face turned away, but wearing the sterling silver bracelet I'd bought Carol when we first started dating. More recent photos showed Bruce with a little girl who looked exactly like the imposter upstairs. Same face, same eyes, different hair color. I heard Carol's car pull into the driveway. My heart raced as their voices got closer. I waited until the fake Allie went to her room before cornering Carol in the kitchen. The camp called, I said, watching her flinch. Something about Allie. Want to take a guess? She paused, then smiled at me. Did she leave something at camp? She never made it to camp, I said bluntly. Where's Allie? Carol laughed nervously. She's upstairs. I slammed my hand down on the kitchen counter. That's not Allie. I'm not stupid, Carol. Allie has a mole on her hand. This girl doesn't. Allie knows Mr. Spots. This girl doesn't. Allie is allergic to tree nuts. This girl isn't. I showed her the pictures with Bruce on my phone. Tell me the truth, or I'll have the cops find the truth for me. Carol's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair and started sobbing. I was going to drive Allie to camp. I was. But Bruce texted me. He was leaving town forever and wanted to say goodbye. Just 1 hour, that's all I needed. So I dropped her off at a Shell station. She had her iPad and snacks. She promised to stay put. No strangers. I told her I'd be right back. Her voice cracked as tears fell. When I came back 3 hours later, she was gone. I searched everywhere. Everywhere! Then I found her at the bottom of the drainage ditch. I couldn't breathe. You left our 8-year-old alone for 3 hours? She choked on her words. I thought I could fix everything. I stared at her. By replacing our daughter with one you had during an affair? Where's Allie now? She bit her lip. I buried her in the woods behind the camp. Just then, we heard a gentle knock on the door. We both froze. Then the knock came again. I walked to the door and opened it. There stood the real Allie. On our porch, covered in mud from head to toe. Leaves and twigs tangled in her matted hair. Dirt caked under her fingernails like she'd clawed her way through earth. Can I have Mr. Spots? I rush forward and pull Allie inside, my hands already reaching for the hallway closet where we keep the clean towels. I grab every single one I can find and wrap them around her shaking body, my fingers pressing against her wrist to check her pulse while my other hand touches her forehead. She's cold and damp, but her heart is beating, her skin clammy under all the dried mud that cracks and falls off in chunks as she moves. Behind me, Carol stands frozen in the doorway, making these weird choking sounds like she can't breathe, but I ignore her completely because my daughter is alive, and that's the only thing that matters right now. Allie keeps whispering the same words over and over in this tiny, scared voice. Mr. Spots, Mr. Spots, Mr. Spots. Carol takes a step toward us and I spin around, positioning myself between them like a wall. Stay back! My voice comes out louder and harder than I meant it to. I yank my phone from my pocket and dial 911 with shaking fingers. Carol's face goes completely white and she starts talking fast, her words tumbling over each other. It was an accident. I can explain everything. Please just let me. I cut her off and speak directly into the phone. I need an ambulance right now. My daughter has been missing for a week and she just showed up covered in mud and dirt. She appears injured and needs immediate medical attention. The dispatcher starts asking questions, but I hear crying from upstairs, the other girl's voice calling out, and I can't deal with that right now because my real daughter needs me. I leave Carol standing there and run to Allie's actual bedroom, the one that's been empty all week. I grab Mr. Spots from where he's been sitting on the shelf, the Dalmatian's black spots and floppy ears exactly like I remember. I rush back and press him into Allie's muddy hands, and she clutches him to her chest immediately. Some of the panic in her eyes fades just a little bit, though she's still shivering hard despite all the towels wrapped around her. Where does it hurt, sweetie? I ask her gently, keeping my voice soft and calm, even though my insides are screaming. My head hurts, she whispers. And my hands. She holds up her small fingers, and I see the dirt packed deep under every single fingernail, dark and thick like she spent hours clawing through earth. The ambulance sirens get louder outside, and within 8 minutes the EMS crew is at our door. I give them a rapid summary while Carol tries to interrupt with her accident story again. My wife left our daughter alone at a gas station for 3 hours, I tell the lead paramedic directly, looking her right in the eyes. The summer camp called multiple times reporting Allie missing. My wife ignored those calls. I suspect this goes way beyond simple negligence. The paramedic's whole expression shifts from routine to alert. She makes a note on her clipboard and nods at her partner. They load Allie onto the stretcher carefully, securing her small body with straps while keeping Mr. Spots tucked under her arm. I climb into the ambulance with Allie while Carol follows in her car, and during the trip I hold my daughter's hand tight and promise her she's safe now. The paramedic asks Allie yes or no questions about pain, and Allie nods or shakes her head, still clutching Mr. Spots with her free hand. Through the ambulance window, I watch the familiar streets pass by. The same ones I drove yesterday thinking everything was normal when actually my whole life was built on lies. At the ER, a doctor takes charge immediately, her calm efficiency helping me focus as she examines Allie's vitals and orders tests for dehydration and possible head injury. Her name tag says Dr. Sandra Metz. She notes the scrapes on Allie's arms and legs, the dirt still embedded under every fingernail, and the way Allie flinches away from the bright exam lights. Does she have any allergies I should know about? Doctor, Metz asks while checking Allie's pupils. Yes, severe tree nut allergy, deathly allergic since birth. Doctor. Metz adds it to the chart with emphasis and keeps an EpiPen nearby on the medical tray. That small action makes me feel slightly less crazy after a whole week of being told I remembered things wrong. A hospital social worker appears within the first hour and asks to speak with me privately while nurses clean Allie up in the exam room. She explains gently that given the circumstances they're required to notify Child Protective Services. My stomach drops even though I know it's necessary and right. I tell her everything I know so far, about the camp calls Carol ignored, about finding all our family photos with Allie's face carefully cut out, about Carol's confession tonight that she buried our daughter in the woods. Detective Simon Sanders introduces himself in the ER waiting area with a quiet handshake and tired eyes that suggest he's seen too many cases like this one. He asks if I'm up for giving a statement, and I nod, grateful that someone official is finally taking this seriously. We sit in a small consultation room with plastic chairs, and he pulls out a notebook. Start from the beginning and take your time, he says. I walk Detective Sanders through the whole timeline, starting with Allie's return from camp looking different, the disappeared photos, the test I did with the bear instead of Mr. Spots, and finally Carol's confession tonight. My voice stays steady and factual until I get to the part about Carol saying she buried Allie, and then I have to stop and breathe for a minute while Sanders waits patiently. He doesn't rush me or act like he thinks I'm crazy or lying. He just nods and writes everything down in careful detail. Sanders asks about the other child, and I explain she's still at the house, that she's Bruce's daughter based on the social media photos I found earlier. I feel guilty even saying the word imposter because she's just a kid caught up in her parents' mess, but I don't know what else to call her. Sanders makes a note to send officers to secure the house and arrange proper care for Bruce's daughter, and I'm relieved someone else is handling that part because I can't think about anything except Allie right now. A nurse appears in the doorway and tells me I can see Allie now. I follow her down the bright hallway past other exam rooms where families deal with their own emergencies. She leads me to a room at the end where Allie sits propped up in a hospital bed that makes her look tiny. Her hair is damp and clean. The worst of the mud washed away, though I can still see traces of dirt in the creases of her neck. She's wearing a hospital gown covered in cartoon bears, and her eyes look clearer than they did when I first saw her on the porch. The moment she spots me, she reaches out both arms, and I cross the room in 3 steps to sit on the edge of her bed. She wraps her arms around my neck, and I can feel her whole body shaking. I hold her carefully, aware of the scrapes and bruises the nurses marked on her chart. After a long moment, she pulls back and looks up at me with those big eyes that are definitely hers, not some stranger's. She leans close and whispers so quietly I have to bend down to hear her. She tells me she waited at the gas station just like Mommy said to do. She had her iPad and the snacks Mommy left, and she promised not to talk to strangers. But Mommy didn't come back, and it got really hot sitting on that bench outside. She thought maybe Mommy forgot and went straight to camp, so she started walking to find it. She saw a path into the woods that looked like it might be a shortcut, but then she slipped on wet leaves near this big concrete tunnel thing. She fell in, and there was gross water and mud everywhere, and she tried to climb out but kept sliding back down. Her hands hurt from trying to grab onto the concrete, and eventually she got so tired she just stopped trying and waited for someone to find her. I stroke her damp hair and tell her she was so brave and she's safe now. A woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun walks into the room carrying a tablet and a leather folder. She introduces herself as Keturah Shepherd from Child Protective Services, and her voice is kind, but has this professional edge that makes my stomach tighten. She explains she needs to do a safety assessment to figure out the best place for Allie while the investigation moves forward. I nod and keep one hand on Allie's shoulder, while Keturah pulls up a chair and opens her tablet. She asks me about my work schedule, and I tell her I work 9 to 5 at an accounting firm downtown, with occasional overtime during tax season. She asks about my relationship with Allie, and I explain we've always been close, that I do breakfast and bedtime routine most days, because Carol works early shifts at the hospital. She asks about my housing situation, and I describe our 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood with good schools. She asks if I have any concerns about my ability to care for Allie full-time, and I look her straight in the eye and tell her I will do absolutely anything to keep my daughter safe. Keturah makes notes on her tablet and asks follow-up questions about my extended family, my financial stability, whether I've ever had any involvement with CPS before. I answer everything honestly and completely because I understand she's doing her job, and Allie's safety depends on getting this right. Outside in the hallway, I hear raised voices and recognize Carol's tone immediately. She's demanding to see her daughter, and a nurse is telling her she needs to wait in the designated area. The voices get louder and I tense up, moving closer to Allie, who shrinks back against her pillows. Detective Sanders appears in the doorway and holds up one hand to me before stepping out into the hall. I hear him speaking in that calm cop voice that somehow makes everything sound non-negotiable. A few minutes pass and he comes back into the room looking tired. He tells me Carol has been asked to wait in a separate area and won't be allowed near Allie's room. The relief hits me so hard, I have to take a deep breath to steady myself. But right behind the relief comes this weird guilt, because part of me still remembers the woman I married. The one who laughed at my terrible jokes and cried happy tears when Allie was born. That woman wouldn't have left our daughter alone at a gas station for 3 hours. That woman wouldn't have tried to bury her and replace her with someone else's child. But maybe I never really knew that woman at all. Keturah closes her tablet and looks at me with an expression I can't quite read. She explains that based on what she's learned today, she's recommending Allie be discharged to my care with a safety plan that includes no contact with Carol. I'll need to find temporary housing away from our family home until the investigation wraps up and we sort out permanent custody arrangements. The practical problems start stacking up in my mind like blocks about to topple over. I need to find a place to stay tonight, figure out how to get time off work, pack clothes for both of us, arrange for someone to check on the house. Money is going to be tight because Carol and I share accounts and I don't know what access I'll have. I need to contact our insurance about Allie's medical bills and find out if my benefits cover emergency family leave. But I push all of that aside and focus on the only thing that actually matters. Allie is alive and she's going to stay with me, and I will figure out everything else as it comes. While I'm sitting with Keturah going over the details of the safety plan, Detective Sanders steps out to take Carol's statement in another part of the hospital. I watch him leave and immediately start wondering what she's telling him. Is she sticking to some version of the accident story, or is she finally being honest about Bruce and the burial and the week she spent pretending everything was fine? Part of me desperately wants to know what she's saying, what excuses she's making, whether she's showing any real remorse for what she did to Allie. But Sanders made it clear I wouldn't be present for her interview, and I understand why, even though it leaves me feeling helpless. I hate not knowing what's happening in that other room, whether Carol is crying or defiant, whether she's trying to minimize what she did or actually owning it. A man in scrubs with a professional camera hanging from his neck knocks on the door and introduces himself as the hospital photographer. He explains gently that he needs to document Allie's injuries for the official record. I hold Allie's hand while he takes careful pictures of the scrapes on her arms and legs, the bruises forming on her shins, the dirt still embedded in places the nurses couldn't fully clean. He photographs her hands up close, showing the dirt packed under every fingernail and the raw spots on her palms from trying to climb out of the culvert. A nurse brings in paper bags and plastic containers, and they start collecting evidence. They bag Allie's muddy clothes that were cut off her in the ER, each piece labeled and sealed with official-looking tags. They scrape samples of dirt from under her fingernails into small containers and seal those too. They collect bits of leaves and twigs that were tangled in her hair and document everything on a chain of custody form. Watching this whole process makes my chest feel tight because it's so official and real and permanent. We've crossed into this world of police investigations and evidence collection and court cases that I never imagined being part of. This isn't something that will just blow over or get worked out privately. This is documented and recorded and will follow us through whatever comes next. By the time evening rolls around, Keturah has finalized the safety plan and Dr. Metz comes in to do a final check. She reviews Allie's vitals and examines her injuries one more time, then explains the follow-up care instructions and hands me a referral for trauma counseling. She tells me Allie is cleared for discharge and emphasizes how important it is to start therapy soon. Keturah confirms I'm approved to take Allie to a motel for tonight, and she'll do a check-in visit tomorrow morning to make sure we're settled. As we're getting ready to leave, Detective Sanders appears and hands me his card with his direct number written on the back. He tells me he'll be in touch soon with updates, and I should call immediately if Carol tries to make any contact. The next morning, I sit in a chair by the window of our cramped motel room, watching Allie sleep in the double bed closest to the bathroom. She's clutching spots against her chest and breathing steady and even. My laptop is open on my knees, and I read through the preliminary report Detective Sanders emailed me with permission to share the relevant parts. Carol's statement confirms she drove Allie to the Shell station on Route 9, intending to drop her at camp right after. But Bruce texted saying he was leaving town forever and wanted to say goodbye. She made the choice to leave Allie alone with her iPad and a bag of snacks, telling her to stay on the bench and not talk to strangers. Carol claims she meant to be gone 1 hour, but lost track of time at Bruce's apartment. When she got back to the gas station 3 hours later, Allie had wandered off. Carol says she searched the area and eventually found Allie unconscious at the bottom of a drainage ditch behind some woods near the camp property. I call my neighbor Aggie Spivey and she answers on the second ring. I ask if she can go over to the house to make sure Bruce's daughter is okay until CPS arrives to handle her placement. There's a long pause and I hear Aggie take a sharp breath. She asks what's going on and I give her the basic facts, that the girl living in our house isn't actually Allie, that she's Bruce's daughter from Carol's affair, that the real Allie is safe with me now. Aggie makes shocked noises but agrees immediately to help. She promises to keep the girl comfortable and make sure Carol doesn't remove her or any evidence from the house before CPS gets there. I thank her and tell her I owe her big time for being willing to get involved in this mess. An hour later, my phone rings and it's Aggie calling back. She tells me she just thought of something I probably didn't consider. Her doorbell camera might have caught Carol's comings and goings during the week Allie was missing. She goes to check the footage right then while I wait on the line. After a few minutes, she comes back and says she found multiple clips of Carol returning home alone during daytime hours when she should have been at work. In every clip, Carol looks stressed and distracted, checking over her shoulder before going inside. The footage confirms Carol was living this completely separate life that whole week, maintaining the house and taking care of Bruce's daughter while knowing Allie was gone. Detective Sanders called me around noon the next day and asked if I could come down to the station to review some footage they pulled from the Shell station. I left Allie with Aggie for a few hours and drove to the police department with my stomach in knots. Sanders led me to a small room with a computer monitor and pulled up the security camera files. The timestamp showed July 14th at 10:47 a.m. when Carol's silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. I watched Carol get out, walk around to the passenger side, and help Allie climb out with her pink backpack and iPad. They talked for a minute near the bench outside the convenience store entrance. Carol pointed at the bench and Allie nodded. Then Carol got back in her car and drove away. The timestamp clicked forward as I watched my daughter sit on that bench alone, swinging her legs and looking at her iPad. She stayed there for almost an hour before setting the device down and looking around. The sun must have gotten hot because she moved into a small patch of shade near the building. At 12:23 p.m., she stood up and walked to the edge of the parking lot, looking down the road in the direction Carol had driven. She waited there for another 20 minutes. At 12:41 p.m., Allie picked up her backpack and iPad and started walking along the road toward the tree line. The camera angle lost her after that. Sanders fast-forwarded to 2:13 p.m. when Carol's car came speeding back into the lot. Carol jumped out and ran to the bench, looking around frantically. She checked inside the store, then came back out and got in her car. The footage ended there. I sat staring at the blank screen, feeling sick. My 8-year-old daughter had waited patiently for over 3 hours before finally giving up and walking off alone. Sanders printed screenshots for the case file and told me the timestamps proved Carol's story about the 3-hour absence. I drove back to the motel in a fog and found an email from Keturah waiting in my inbox. She'd sent me a copy of her safety plan memo that included notes about Bruce's daughter. The girl had given her name as Allie when CPS workers first spoke to her and seemed genuinely confused about why strangers were asking her questions about her family. The memo explained that CPS was working to locate Bruce through the phone records and verify paternity. If confirmed, the child would be placed with him rather than foster care since he was her biological father and had no apparent child welfare history. Reading those notes made me feel a mix of anger at Bruce and Carol for creating this mess, but also this weird sympathy for a little girl who didn't ask to be part of any of this nightmare. She was just a kid whose parents made terrible choices. I closed my laptop and called the camp to speak with Phil North, the director whose number Detective Sanders had given me. Phil answered on the third ring, and I explained who I was. His voice immediately shifted from professional to horrified when I told him what actually happened after Carol informed him about a family emergency. He put me on hold for a minute, then came back with his records pulled up. Phil confirmed they called Carol 6 times on July 14th, starting at 11:30 a.m. when Allie didn't arrive on the camp bus. Carol declined every single call. They finally reached her around 4 p.m., and she told them they were dealing with a family crisis, and Allie wouldn't be attending camp that week. Phil said he'd accepted the explanation because parents sometimes had emergencies, but now knowing what really happened made him feel terrible. He offered to provide written documentation of all the calls, the times, and Carol's eventual response. I thanked him and said Detective Sanders would probably be in touch to collect that evidence. That evening, I focused on establishing some kind of routine with Allie in our cramped motel room. I ordered her favorite chicken nuggets from the diner down the street and let her watch cartoons on the small TV while I sat in the chair nearby. She kept Mr. Spots in her lap the whole time, one hand always touching the stuffed Dalmatian like she needed to make sure it was real. Twice during dinner, she looked up at me with worried eyes and asked if I was going to leave. Each time I got down on my knees next to her and promised I was staying right here, that I wasn't going anywhere without her. After we finished eating, I ran a bath and helped her wash the last stubborn traces of mud from her hair. She played quietly with plastic cups, filling them with water and pouring them out again while I worked the shampoo through her tangles. The bathroom was tiny and the water barely stayed hot, but Allie seemed content just having me there. I got her into clean pajamas and tucked her into the bed closest to the bathroom with Mr. Spots under her arm. She fell asleep within minutes, exhausted from everything. The next morning, Detective Sanders called and asked if he could stop by to share some information. I met him in the motel parking lot while Allie watched cartoons inside. Sanders handed me printed copies of text message excerpts between Carol and Bruce that the phone company released with the warrant. I read through them standing there in the morning sun. The first message was from Carol at 1:47 p.m. on July 14th, saying she couldn't find Allie and didn't know what to do. Bruce responded immediately telling her to call the police. Carol wrote back that she couldn't, because then she'd have to admit she left Allie alone to see him. Bruce sent 3 more messages over the next hour, all saying to call the cops, that Allie's safety mattered more than getting in trouble. Then there was a gap of several hours with no messages. At 6:23 p.m., Carol texted just 4 words. I found her, but it's bad. Bruce replied, how bad? Carol's response was 2 words. I fixed it. Reading those messages made me feel physically sick. The casual way they discussed my daughter's life, like she was a problem to solve instead of a child who needed help. I handed the papers back to Sanders with shaking hands, and he told me these would be key evidence in the criminal case. Later that afternoon, Keturah called to tell me Allie had a forensic interview scheduled for tomorrow at the Child Advocacy Center. She walked me through what to expect in her calm, professional voice. I wasn't allowed to prep Allie or suggest what she should say. I just needed to bring her to the appointment and wait while a specially trained interviewer asked questions in a child-friendly way. The interview would be recorded and could be used in court proceedings, so hopefully Allie wouldn't have to testify multiple times in front of strangers. Keturah emphasized that the interviewer was experienced with traumatized children and would go at Allie's pace. I agreed to bring her in at 10 a.m. the next day. The forensic interview took place in a room decorated to look like a playroom with toys and bright colors on the walls. A staff member showed me to a separate room where I could watch on a monitor, while a gentle interviewer with kind eyes sat down with Allie. The interviewer introduced herself and spent the first 10 minutes just playing with blocks and asking Allie about her favorite things. Then she asked Allie to tell her about the gas station. Allie's voice came through the speaker, quiet but clear. She explained that Mommy said to wait on the bench, and she did wait just like she was supposed to. But then it got really hot and Mommy didn't come back. Allie said she thought maybe Mommy went to the camp without her by accident, so she started walking that direction. She saw a path going into the woods and thought it might be a shortcut to the camp. But then she slipped on wet leaves near this concrete tunnel thing and fell in. The tunnel was full of gross water and mud that came up to her chest. She tried to climb out, but the sides were too slippery and she kept sliding back down. Eventually, she got so tired she just stopped trying and sat there in the water. The interviewer asked how long she was in the tunnel, and Allie said she didn't know, maybe a really long time because it got dark. I watched my daughter tell this story while playing with a stuffed animal, her voice matter-of-fact like she was describing a normal day. After the interview, I held Allie tight in the waiting room while Keturah thanked us for coming in. Detective Sanders organized a search team the same afternoon to check the woods behind the camp property. I got a call from him around 5 p.m. with an update. They found disturbed soil near a drainage culvert about half a mile from the main road. The area showed clear signs of recent digging with loose dirt and displaced leaves. The search team recovered Allie's iPad buried in a shallow hole nearby. The screen was cracked, but the device was intact and still had mud caked in the charging port. Sanders told me the location matched Allie's description perfectly, and they were sending soil samples to the lab. He said the preliminary assessment indicated the soil composition matched the dirt they'd collected from under Allie's fingernails at the hospital. That meant Carol really did find her in that culvert, and then made the choice to bury her there instead of getting help. The evidence was building a timeline that was both clear and horrible. 2 days later, Katura called with news that CPS successfully located Bruce through the phone records. He came in voluntarily for a paternity test and didn't contest it because he already knew the child was his. Katura arranged for supervised retrieval of his daughter's belongings from our house with a CPS worker present to make sure nothing went wrong. The little girl was placed in temporary CPS care at a foster home until the test results came back confirming Bruce as her biological father. Once that happened, she'd be transitioned to his custody with a support plan and follow-up visits. I felt strange knowing she was in the system now because of choices her parents made. I hoped Bruce was actually capable of taking care of her properly and wouldn't mess up her life any more than it already was. That same week, Aggie called and said I should talk to a family attorney she knew named Samir Leone, who handled difficult custody cases. I made an appointment and met Samir at his office in a converted house downtown. He was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a calm way of talking that made me feel slightly less panicked. I spread out all my documentation on his desk, including the police reports, CPS memos, medical records from the ER, and my own timeline of events. Samir reviewed everything with an impressed nod at how organized I'd kept everything. He explained we needed to file for emergency custody immediately and get a protective order keeping Carol away from both me and Allie. The legal fees made my stomach hurt when he quoted them, but Samir offered a payment plan that broke it into monthly amounts I could maybe manage. I agreed because I didn't have any other choice, and keeping Allie safe was worth going into debt. Samir called me 2 days later to say he filed the motion that morning at the courthouse. He walked me through what he submitted, all the police reports and CPS documents and medical records from the ER bundled together in one thick packet. The motion asked the judge to give me full custody right away and keep Carol away from both me and Allie. Samir said we should hear back within a few days, maybe a week at most. He told me judges usually grant these kinds of emergency requests when there's clear danger to a child, but he warned me nothing is guaranteed in family court. Some judges move fast and some judges take forever, and we just had to wait and see which kind we got. I thanked him and hung up, feeling like at least something was moving forward, even if it was slow. That afternoon, my boss called while I was sitting in the motel room watching Allie color at the small desk. He asked how I was doing and if everything was okay with my family. I kept my answer vague, just saying we had a serious family crisis and I needed some time off to handle it. He was nice about it and said he understood, but then he explained the leave policy. I had 2 weeks of paid time off saved up, and after that, any additional leave would be unpaid. My stomach dropped because I knew 2 weeks wasn't going to be enough time to sort out everything with lawyers and courts and CPS. He told me to keep him updated and said the company would work with me as much as they could. I promised I would stay in touch and ended the call. Then I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and let myself freak out quietly for 5 minutes. I sat on the edge of the tub with my head in my hands, thinking about money and bills and how I was going to pay for everything. The legal fees, the motel, food, gas, medical bills, everything was piling up and my income was about to drop to zero after my paid leave ran out. I made myself breathe slowly and count to 10 over and over until the panic faded a little. Then I washed my face and went back out to sit with Allie like nothing happened. The next morning, we had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Metz at her clinic. She checked Allie's arms and legs where the scratches were healing and said they looked good, no signs of infection. She asked Allie gentle questions about whether her head hurt or if she felt dizzy. Allie said her head hurt really bad at first, but it felt better now. Dr. Metz nodded and made notes on her tablet. Then she turned to me and handed me a referral card for a therapist named Dr. Fleming, who works with kids who went through bad things. She told me not to wait to make the appointment, that getting Allie into therapy right away would make a big difference in how she handles everything that happened. I took the card and promised I would call that day. Dr. Metz smiled at Allie and gave her a sticker before we left. I called Dr. Fleming's office from the parking lot and got Allie scheduled for an intake appointment later that week. 2 days after that, Detective Sanders called with an update about the evidence. He said the crime lab finished analyzing the soil samples they collected from the drainage site and from under Allie's fingernails. The dirt matched perfectly, same composition and everything. This proved Allie really was at that culvert trying to dig her way out, exactly like she told the forensic interviewer. Sanders said this evidence was huge because it backed up Allie's story and also proved Carol was telling the truth about finding Allie there. It meant Carol really did find our daughter in that ditch and then chose to bury her instead of getting help. The thought made me feel sick all over again, but I thanked Sanders for the update. He said the prosecutor was building a strong case and I should expect to hear more soon. That same afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail and then saw the notification pop up. My hand stayed frozen over the play button for a long time. Part of me wanted to hear what Carol had to say, wanted to hear her voice and maybe get some kind of explanation that would make sense of everything. But Samir told me clearly not to engage with her at all, just document any contact and forward it to him or Sanders. So I sent the voicemail straight to Sanders without listening to it, and then blocked the number. It was harder than I expected, not listening. Even after everything she did, I still had this stupid urge to hear her out. But I followed Samir's advice because keeping Allie safe mattered more than my need for answers. 3 days later, I got a call from Samir saying the judge granted our emergency motion. He emailed me a copy of the court order, and I read it on my phone while sitting in the motel parking lot. The official language said I had temporary sole custody, and Carol was prohibited from contacting Allie or coming within 500 feet of wherever we were staying. Reading those words in black and white legal text made everything feel real in a way nothing else had. The court system agreed with me. A judge looked at all the evidence and decided Allie wasn't safe with her mother. I felt relief wash over me, but also this deep sadness, like I was mourning the family we were supposed to be. Carol and I were supposed to grow old together, raise Allie together, be a team. And now a court order said she couldn't even be near her own daughter. The next day, Keturah came to the motel to do a home check. She walked through our tiny room looking at everything, checking that we had clean sheets and food in the mini fridge and that the bathroom worked properly. She asked me questions about how long we planned to stay here and what my plans were for more permanent housing. I told her I was looking at short-term rentals, but money was tight since I was living on one income now. She nodded like she'd heard this story 100 times before. Then she pulled out some papers about emergency housing assistance programs and told me I should apply. I wanted to say no, wanted to tell her I could handle this on my own. But Allie's stability mattered more than my pride, so I took the papers and said thank you. Keturah approved the motel as temporary housing and said she'd check in again next week. That afternoon, Aggie called to tell me she gave a statement to Detective Sanders. She said she told him about seeing a kid who looked like Bruce's daughter at our house during the week Allie was missing. Her doorbell camera caught footage of the girl playing in our front yard, which helped prove when Carol made the swap. Aggie also mentioned she saw Carol loading bags into her car late one night that week. Sanders thought that might have been when Carol moved all of Allie's stuff out to make room for the other girl's things. I thanked Aggie for being willing to get involved and told her I really appreciated her help. She said of course that's what neighbors do. I met with Samir again at his office to talk about what criminal charges Carol might face. He explained that child endangerment is a felony in our state, and if Carol gets convicted, she could go to prison for years. If that happens, she would almost definitely lose all parental rights permanently. The thought of Allie growing up without her mother made me sad even after everything Carol did. But Samir reminded me that Carol made her choices, and now she had to deal with what happens next. He said the prosecutor would probably offer a plea deal to avoid putting Allie through a trial. Later that week, I took Allie to her first therapy appointment. We sat in a waiting room decorated with bright painted murals of animals and trees. Other families came and went, kids of all ages with tired-looking parents. A woman came out and introduced herself as Dr. Fleming. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice. When Allie hid behind my legs, Dr. Fleming didn't push or try to force anything. She talked to me for a few minutes first, asking basic questions about what brought us in. Then she invited Allie to come play with some toys in her office while they talked. Allie looked up at me and I nodded that it was okay. I sat in the lobby for the next 40 minutes trying not to imagine what my daughter was telling this stranger about gas stations and ditches and dark water. The office door opened and Fleming stepped out, gesturing for me to come back. She sat down across from me in a small consultation room and pulled out a notepad. She explained I should keep things normal at home, stick to regular routines and bedtime so Allie feels safe. She told me not to ask her leading questions about what happened at the gas station or in the ditch, just let her bring it up if she wants to talk. Fleming said kids Allie's age usually work through bad experiences by playing instead of talking about feelings directly, so I shouldn't worry if she doesn't want to discuss it. The advice made me feel a little less lost, like there were actual things I could do to help instead of just waiting and hoping. A few days later, Keturah called to tell me Bruce had contacted CPS through his own lawyer about getting custody of his daughter. The paternity test came back confirming he was the biological father of the girl who had been living in our house as Allie. CPS started an expedited review to see if Bruce could take her, doing background checks and visiting his home to make sure it was safe. I had mixed feelings about the whole thing because Bruce was part of the affair that caused all this mess in the first place. But his daughter didn't ask for any of this, and she deserved to be with her real dad if he could take care of her properly. Sanders called me later that week with an update about Carol's story, which kept changing as more evidence piled up against her. At first she claimed it was all an accident, but now she was saying it was a panic response when she found Allie unconscious in the culvert. Carol admitted she thought Allie was dead when she found her lying there in the water and mud, so she made a split-second choice to bury her in the woods and swap her with Bruce's daughter instead of calling for help and facing what she'd done. Sanders said Carol's lawyer was trying to sell this as a mental breakdown, like she just snapped and wasn't thinking clearly. But Sanders pointed out the cut photos in the attic, and the whole week Carol spent pretending everything was fine, which showed way more planning than just panicking in the moment. The motel bills were eating through my savings way faster than I thought they would, and I started looking at my bank account every morning with a sick feeling in my stomach. I needed to make some hard choices about money. I took photos of my camera equipment and posted everything online for sale, the nice digital camera and all the lenses I'd saved up for over 3 years. Strangers started showing up in the motel parking lot to look at the gear, turning the lenses over in their hands and asking about shutter counts. Each time I handed over a piece of equipment and took their cash, I felt like I was giving up a part of myself. But I smiled and made small talk about aperture settings, because this is what you do when you're a parent, and your kid needs stability more than you need hobbies. That night, Allie woke up screaming, and I bolted out of my bed to get to her. She was sitting up with her eyes wide open, sobbing about dark water and something heavy pressing down on her chest. I climbed into bed next to her and pulled her against me, rocking her slowly while she cried into my shirt. I didn't ask her to explain what she saw or tell me details about the dream, just held her close and whispered that she was safe now, that I was right here, and nothing was going to hurt her ever again. After a while, her breathing got slower and steadier, and she fell back asleep still holding Mr. Spots tight against her chest. I stayed awake for the rest of the night watching her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest to make sure she was really okay. Katura sent me an email a few days later with part of the CPS case notes attached. The notes said Carol had asked for supervised visits with Allie, but CPS denied the request until the criminal charges got resolved. They cited Allie's ongoing trauma symptoms and how serious Carol's actions were as reasons to keep them apart for now. I felt guilty for being relieved when I read that, like I should want Allie to have access to her mother no matter what happened. But mostly I just felt grateful she didn't have to see Carol right now, while everything was still so fresh and scary. Sanders called again to tell me he needed a DNA test for Allie to shut down any possible claims Carol might make about getting the wrong kid or being confused about identities. I was annoyed that we even had to do this when I knew my own daughter, but Sanders explained it was about making the case completely airtight, so Carol's lawyer couldn't poke holes in anything. We drove to the lab the next morning, and Allie was really brave while the technician swabbed the inside of her cheek. I bought her a big ice cream sundae afterward with extra sprinkles, because these tiny treats were one of the few things I could actually control right now. I spent my lunch breaks looking at rental listings online, scrolling through photos of small houses and doing math in my head about whether I could afford them. Finally, I found a 2-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood that would stretch my budget to the limit but seemed safe and clean. I drove over to see it, and the landlord showed me around, pointing out the new locks on the doors and the fenced backyard. My hands shook when I signed the lease because I was committing to something I could barely afford, but Allie needed a real home instead of a motel room. Moving day was completely exhausting, coordinating with the police to go back to the family house and get our stuff while Carol was required to stay away. I loaded boxes into a borrowed truck while officers stood watch, making sure Carol didn't show up and cause problems. At the new house, I set up Allie's bedroom first, hanging the few photos I'd managed to save from the attic and arranging her toys exactly the way she liked them so the space would feel familiar and safe instead of strange and scary. Phil sent me an email with the camp's official incident report about the drainage culvert where Allie fell. The report showed the camp had contacted the county multiple times over the past 2 years about the hazard, asking them to cover it or put up better fencing, but nothing ever got done. Reading through all the ignored warnings made me so angry, I had to put my phone down and walk around the block to calm down. All these systems that were supposed to prevent disasters just moved too slow or didn't care enough, and if anyone had done their job properly, maybe Allie never would have ended up trapped in that ditch. I forwarded the whole report to Sanders in case it mattered for the investigation. A week later, Katura called to tell me Bruce's paternity was officially confirmed, and CPS had approved him for placement after checking everything out. His home visit went well and his job was stable, so they were moving his daughter into his care with a support plan and regular follow-up visits to make sure things stayed okay. I felt strange knowing she was out there somewhere starting a completely new life. This little girl who lived as my daughter for a week, but never really was mine at all, and I hoped Bruce would do better by her than he did by Allie when he chose to keep the affair going for 3 years. 2 days later, I had an appointment at the CPS office to sign some paperwork about Allie's case status. I walked into the waiting area and saw Bruce sitting 3 chairs down from where I needed to check in. We both froze when we made eye contact, and the air got thick and uncomfortable between us. He stood up and took a step toward me with his hands shoved in his pockets. I could tell he wanted to say something by the way he kept opening his mouth and closing it again. Finally, he managed to get words out about how sorry he was for everything that happened and how he never meant for any of this to hurt Allie. I held up my hand to stop him before he could finish because I didn't want to hear excuses or apologies that wouldn't change anything. I told him the only thing that mattered now was whether he took proper care of his daughter and gave her the stable life she deserved. He nodded slowly and looked down at his shoes while I signed in at the front desk. We stood there in awful silence for another minute, and I could feel both of us thinking the same thing without saying it, that our kids needed to come first no matter how much anger sat between us. When the receptionist called his name, he walked past me toward the back offices, and we didn't shake hands or say goodbye. Later that afternoon, I met with Dr. Fleming for a parent check-in session without Allie present. She explained that Allie's therapy sessions kept coming back to themes about control and feeling powerless, which made sense after being abandoned and trapped in that ditch. Dr. Fleming suggested I start offering Allie small choices throughout the day to help her feel like she had power over her own life again. She said it could be simple things like asking which shirt Allie wanted to wear or what she preferred for breakfast, just giving her the chance to make decisions instead of having everything decided for her. I started doing it that same evening when we got home. I laid out 2 different shirts on Allie's bed and asked which one she wanted to wear tomorrow. She picked the blue one with the stars and seemed surprised that I was asking, instead of just telling her what to put on. At dinner, I gave her options for her sandwich and let her choose which cup to use for her milk. These were tiny, meaningless choices that didn't really matter, but I noticed Allie's shoulders relaxed a little when she got to pick things herself. Over the next few days, I kept it up with everything from which shoes to wear to what show to watch before bed. Allie started making her choices faster and with more confidence, like she was remembering she was allowed to have opinions about her own life. The following week, Detective Sanders called to tell me he'd gotten a search warrant approved for our old house. He wanted to go back and properly document the attic where I'd found the box of cut photos, since that evidence was crucial for showing Carol's planning. I met him there along with 2 other officers and a forensic photographer. Walking back into that house felt strange and wrong after everything that happened there. We went straight up to the attic, and I showed Sanders exactly where the box had been stored under some old blankets. The photographer took pictures of the location first. Then they carefully removed the box and brought it down to the dining room table for better lighting. Sanders put on gloves and lifted out each photo one by one while the photographer documented every single image. There must have been 40 or 50 pictures total, and in every one, Allie's face had been carefully cut out with scissors, leaving clean rectangular holes where her smile should have been. Sanders explained this was powerful evidence of premeditation because it showed Carol didn't just panic after finding Allie in the ditch. She'd been planning the replacement carefully, removing all traces of the real Allie from our home before bringing Bruce's daughter in. The systematic way she'd cut out every face proved she was thinking clearly and making calculated choices rather than acting in some kind of mental breakdown. They bagged each photo separately and labeled everything for the evidence chain. A few days after that, the DNA test results came back in a thick envelope from the lab. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it with shaking hands, even though I already knew what it would say. The report confirmed with scientific certainty that Allie was the biological daughter of both me and Carol, matching our DNA profiles with over 99% probability. I never doubted for 1 second that the girl who showed up on my porch was my real daughter, but seeing it written out in official lab language felt good anyway. It was like the universe was backing me up and confirming what I'd known in my bones from the moment I saw her. I made copies of the results and drove them over to Samir's office so he could add them to our custody case file. The next morning, Samir called with news that the prosecutor had filed formal charges against Carol. He read them off over the phone, and there were 3 main ones. Felony child endangerment for leaving Allie alone at the gas station and failing to get her medical help after finding her in the ditch. Tampering with evidence for cutting up the photos and trying to hide what she'd done. Filing a false report for lying to the camp about a family emergency. Samir explained each charge carried serious penalties, and together Carol could face years in prison if convicted. He said Carol's lawyer would probably try to work out a plea deal rather than go to trial because trials were risky and unpredictable. The prosecutor had signaled she was open to plea discussions, but wanted real consequences that matched how serious Carol's actions were and how much harm they caused Allie. I asked Samir what a plea deal would mean, and he said it could involve Carol pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a specific sentence recommendation. The benefit would be that Allie wouldn't have to testify in court and relive everything in front of strangers. 2 weeks before the preliminary hearing, Samir had me come to his office for practice sessions. He explained I'd need to testify about finding Allie on the porch and what Carol confessed to me that night. He coached me to stick to just the facts and not let my emotions take over on the witness stand. He said I should answer only what the lawyers asked me and not volunteer extra information or go off on tangents. We practiced with him asking me questions and me giving short, clear answers. He'd stop me whenever I started adding too much detail or getting worked up and remind me to breathe and focus. I went home and practiced more in front of the bathroom mirror, saying the words out loud until I could get through the whole thing without my voice shaking. I wasn't sure I'd actually manage to stay calm when it was real, and Carol was sitting right there. But at least I felt somewhat prepared. The preliminary hearing was one of the most surreal and horrible experiences of my life. I sat in the courtroom waiting area until they called me in, and then I had to walk past Carol sitting at the defense table with her lawyer. She kept her eyes down and didn't look at me once during the whole hearing. Her lawyer stood up and argued for reduced charges based on Carol's mental state and the fact she had no prior criminal record. He painted her as a desperate mother who made terrible choices during a psychological crisis rather than someone who deliberately harmed her child. The prosecutor stood up next and presented the evidence piece by piece. The phone records showing Carol ignored the camp's calls, the text messages with Bruce, the cut photos from the attic. Allie's medical records from the hospital, the Shell station security footage. She laid it all out methodically and calmly, while I sat in the gallery and watched the judge's face for any hint of what he was thinking. I felt desperate for someone in authority to take this as seriously as it deserved and to see through Carol's lawyer's excuses. The whole hearing took about 90 minutes, and then the judge said he needed time to review everything before making his ruling. At the end, the judge announced he was continuing the no-contact order, which meant Carol still couldn't come near me or Allie. He set a trial date 3 months out, but encouraged both sides to work towards some kind of resolution that put the child's best interests first. He specifically said Allie should keep going to therapy without any interference, and that any future custody arrangements had to focus completely on her safety and stability. I left the courthouse feeling like we'd moved forward, but also like justice was moving impossibly slowly. 3 months felt like forever when I just wanted this whole nightmare resolved. That evening, a number I didn't recognize called my phone, and when I answered, a woman identified herself as a reporter from the local news. She said she'd heard about the case through courthouse contacts and wanted to interview me about what happened. My stomach dropped, and I told her firmly that I wouldn't be making any statements. I hung up and immediately called Samir, who said I'd done exactly the right thing. He explained I should say nothing publicly to protect Allie's privacy and avoid anything that might complicate the case or prejudice potential jurors. The idea of this becoming some kind of news story made me feel physically sick. I hated imagining strangers sitting around discussing my daughter's trauma like it was entertainment or gossip. The school counselor called me in for a meeting to discuss Allie returning to class. We'd kept her home for weeks while she started therapy and adjusted to everything, but she needed to get back to normal routines. We worked out a safety plan where the counselor would be briefed on the basic situation without unnecessary details about what Carol did. The plan included strict pickup protocols, so only I was authorized to collect Allie from the school, and anyone else would be turned away immediately. Her teacher agreed to give Allie grace on all the assignments she'd missed, and to let her sit near the door if she needed to feel like she could leave the room. On Allie's first day back, I walked her all the way to her classroom door. She held my hand tight and kept looking back at me as we got closer. I knelt down and reminded her that her teacher knew she'd been through something hard and would be understanding. I promised I'd be there at pickup time and wouldn't be late. She nodded and took a deep breath before walking through the doorway. I stood in the hallway and watched her disappear into the building, feeling terrified something would go wrong, but knowing she needed this piece of normalcy back in her life. I walked back to my car and my phone buzzed before I even got the door open. The HR representative asked if I could come in that afternoon for a follow-up meeting about my situation. I drove straight to the office and sat across from her in a small conference room while she pulled up my file on her laptop. She explained they could offer me a flexible schedule that would let me do school pickup and make it to Allie's therapy appointments without using all my leave time. I felt relief wash over me until she mentioned the catch. The flexible arrangement meant reduced hours, which meant reduced pay, probably around 20% less than my current salary. I sat there doing quick math in my head about rent and utilities and therapy copays and groceries. The numbers didn't really work, but I didn't have any other choice. I accepted the offer and thanked her for working with me. On the drive home, I started making a mental list of what I could cut from our budget. The internet could go down to the cheapest plan. I could cancel the streaming services we barely used anyway. Maybe I could sell some more stuff from the garage. Every financial decision felt like choosing between Allie's needs and basic survival, and I was constantly doing math in my head about what we could afford. That night, I sat down with Allie after dinner and told her we should make a bedtime routine together. She liked the idea immediately and grabbed a piece of paper and some markers from her art supplies. We wrote out a checklist with her doing most of the writing in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. First item was checking all the door locks, which we walked through together, her little hand turning each deadbolt while I watched. Second was setting out Mr. Spots on her pillow so he'd be ready when she climbed into bed. Third was picking out tomorrow's outfit and laying it on her chair. Fourth was reviewing what tomorrow would look like, so she knew exactly what to expect. She wanted to add brushing teeth and washing face, so we included those too. When we finished, she insisted we go through the whole routine twice to make sure it worked right. I never rushed her, even though I was exhausted and wanted to collapse on the couch. We checked every lock twice, arranged Mr. Spots carefully both times, picked out her clothes, and then changed our minds and picked different ones. These small rituals seemed to help her feel safer, like the world was more controllable than it felt in that culvert. By the time she finally got into bed, she looked calmer than she had in weeks. The next afternoon, while Allie was at the school, I walked through the house and took down the last of the wedding photos from the walls. There were 3 framed pictures still hanging in the hallway, showing Carol and me on our wedding day, looking happy and young and stupid. I carefully removed each frame and carried them out to the garage where I'd set up a storage box. I didn't destroy them because they were part of our history, even if that history was built on lies. But I couldn't look at them every day anymore. When Allie got home, she noticed the empty spots on the wall right away and asked why Mommy's pictures were gone. I knelt down to her level and told her gently that Mommy made some bad choices and needs to fix things before we can think about pictures. She stared at the blank wall for a minute, and then just nodded and went to get a snack from the kitchen. She accepted it with a child's simple logic and didn't push for more explanation. I was grateful she was too young to fully understand how completely Carol betrayed us and how those wedding photos represented a version of our family that never really existed. 3 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Bruce's voice came through sounding nervous and apologetic. He said his daughter was adjusting well to being back with him, and he wanted to offer an apology for his role in everything that happened. His words came out rushed like he'd practiced them. He said he never imagined Carol would do something so extreme, and he was horrified by how his affair contributed to Allie's suffering. Part of me wanted to hang up, but another part needed to hear him take some responsibility. I told him I appreciated the call, but I wasn't ready to forgive anyone yet. We talked for maybe 5 more minutes about practical things like making sure our kids never accidentally ran into each other at stores or parks. He agreed to be careful about that. We ended the conversation on civil, if not warm terms, and I felt strange after hanging up. Bruce wasn't the villain in this story, but he wasn't innocent either, and I didn't know what to do with that complicated truth. The prosecutor called me the following week and explained that Carol's lawyer was seriously pursuing a plea deal. She asked if I would be willing to draft a victim impact statement for the judge to consider during sentencing. I agreed and then called Samir to help me figure out what to write. We met at his office and he pulled up a template on his computer while I tried to organize my thoughts. He coached me to focus on the harm to Allie without being overly emotional, to stick to facts about her ongoing nightmares and therapy needs, and the loss of trust in her mother. I dictated while he typed, and we went through multiple revisions to get the tone right. Writing it all down in formal language made the trauma feel both more real and more distant somehow. The clinical words on the page didn't capture the sound of Allie screaming in her sleep or the way she flinched when someone knocked on the door unexpectedly. We finished a draft that Samir said was strong and appropriate, and I saved it to review again before submitting it officially. That weekend, Allie surprised me by coming into the living room, holding an old photo album I didn't know she'd found. She opened it to a picture from her 6th birthday party at the park, where all 3 of us were smiling at the camera. She asked quietly if we could hang one photo of her with both me and Carol from before everything happened. My first instinct was to say no, but I stopped myself and really looked at her face. She needed to know her mother existed, and that there were good times even if they ended badly. I agreed carefully and explained that we can remember the good times, while also knowing Mommy made bad choices. We went to the store together and picked out a simple frame, and she chose a spot on her bedroom shelf where she could see it, but it wasn't the main focus. We framed it together with her helping to position the photo just right behind the glass. I watched her work with fierce concentration, and I was amazed by her capacity to hold complicated feelings that most adults struggled with. 2 weeks later, Samir called to tell me Carol was entering a guilty plea. I drove to the courthouse and sat in the gallery while her lawyer stood up and announced she was pleading guilty to reduced charges of felony child endangerment. The prosecutor read out the sentence recommendation, which included probation, mandatory mental health treatment, and community service rather than prison time. The plea agreement required Carol to complete parenting classes and therapy before any consideration of supervised visitation, and the judge would make the final decision on sentencing. I sat there feeling bitter that she was avoiding prison, but also relieved that Allie wouldn't have to testify at trial. Carol stood at the defense table in a conservative dress looking small and broken, and I felt nothing when I looked at her. The woman I married didn't exist anymore, or maybe she never existed at all. The judge took a week to review everything before the sentencing hearing. When the day came, I sat in the same courtroom and listened while he went through the terms of Carol's plea. He accepted the deal but added strict conditions, including long-term no contact, unless specifically recommended by both Allie's therapist and CPS, after Carol demonstrates significant progress in treatment. He spoke directly to Carol and made it clear that any violation of the order would result in immediate incarceration. He said Allie's safety and well-being were the only factors that mattered in any future custody decisions, and Carol needed to understand she'd lost the right to be a mother until she proved she could be trusted again. Leaving the courthouse, I felt like we got partial justice but not complete vindication, which seems to be how the legal system works. Carol was being held accountable, but not really punished in a way that felt proportional to what she'd done. The next weekend, Aggie offered to help us take new family photos to hang in the house. We met her at a local park where fall leaves covered the ground in red and gold. She brought her nice camera and had us pose in different spots under the trees. Allie picked out her favorite dress and insisted on bringing Mr. Spots for some of the shots. We took dozens of photos with just the 2 of us making silly faces and serious faces and everything in between. Aggie was patient and kind and made Allie laugh, which resulted in some genuinely happy pictures. We didn't post them anywhere or share them publicly because this was just for us to mark our fresh start. When we got the prints back, Allie picked out frames shaped like stars and insisted on arranging them herself on the wall in our living room. I watched her create our new family gallery with fierce concentration, carefully spacing each frame and making sure they were level. These photos showed who we really were now, just the 2 of us building something new from the broken pieces. The financial strain didn't magically disappear just because the legal case was resolved. I juggled payment plans with Samir for his legal fees, therapy copays every week for Allie's sessions, and basic living expenses on my reduced income. I picked up extra weekend shifts doing freelance work after Allie went to bed, sitting at my laptop until midnight editing photos for other people's happy occasions. Some days I survived on coffee and determination, but we were making it work. The house stayed warm, and the fridge stayed full, and Allie had everything she needed even if I was running on empty. I kept a detailed budget spreadsheet and updated it constantly, moving money between categories like a chess game. Every bill that got paid on time felt like a small victory, and every month we made it through without going into debt was proof that we could survive this. I glance at the clock on my nightstand showing 3:47 a.m. and quietly push open Allie's bedroom door for the second time tonight. She lies curled on her side with Mr. Spots tucked under her arm, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. No thrashing, no crying out, no sitting up confused and scared like she has every night for months. I stand there watching her peaceful face for a full minute, afraid that if I look away she'll wake up screaming about dark water and heavy dirt pressing down, but she just keeps sleeping. Her small hand relaxed against the Dalmatian's worn fur, and I feel something tight in my chest start to loosen just a fraction. I back out of her room carefully and return to my own bed where I lie awake staring at the ceiling, my ears straining for any sound from down the hall. Every creak of the house settling makes my heart jump, and I get up twice more before dawn to check the locks on all the doors and windows. Sleep doesn't come easy for me anymore, and probably won't for a long time, but watching Allie sleep through the whole night without nightmares feels like we turned some kind of corner. The next morning, I pull out my desk drawer and file away the victim impact statement behind the court documents and Carol's plea agreement, everything organized in a manila folder I can access if needed, but don't have to see every day. Tomorrow is Thursday, which means therapy for Allie, followed by our regular stop for ice cream at the place near the park, where she always gets chocolate chip. Our weeks have a rhythm now, predictable and safe, and even though the scars from everything haven't magically disappeared, I can see us building something new. Every ordinary Thursday feels like proof that we survived, that we're still here making memories, and that's worth celebrating even if nobody else would understand why getting ice cream matters so much.